Hi everybody, and welcome back to From the Shelf. I'm Miss Cindy from the South Brunswick Public Library, and today we are going to be reading through Chapter 5 of The Wind in the Willows. Today's chapter is called Dulce Domum. The sheep ran huddling together against the hurdles, blowing out thin nostrils and stamping with delicate forefeet, their heads thrown back and a light steam rising from the crowded sheep pen into the frosty air. They were returning across country after a long day's outing with Otter, hunting and exploring on the wide uplands where certain streams, tributary to their own river, had their first small beginnings. "It looks as if we are coming to a village," said the mole somewhat dubiously, slackening his pace as the track, that had in time become a path and then had developed into a lane, now handed them over to the charge of a well-metalled road. The animals did not hold with villages, and their own highways, thickly frequented as they were, took an independent course, regardless of church, post office, or public house. "Oh, never mind," said the rat. "At this season of the year they're all safe indoors by this time, sitting round the fire. Men, women, and children, dogs and cats and all. We shall slip through all right without any bother or unpleasantness, and we can have a look at them through their windows, if you like, and see what they're doing." But it was one little window, with its blind drawn down, a mere blank transparency on the night, that the sense of home and the little curtained world within walls, the larger stressful world of outside nature shut out and forgotten, most pulsated. Close against the white blind hung a birdcage, clearly silhouetted, every wire, perch, and appurtenance distinct and recognizable, even to yesterday's dull-edged lump of sugar. On the middle perch, the fluffy occupant, head tucked well into feathers, seemed so near to them as to be easily stroked, had they tried, even the delicate tips of his plumped-out plumage penciled plainly on the illuminated screen. As they looked, the sleepy little fellow stirred uneasily, woke, shook himself, and raised his head. They could see the gape of his tiny beak as he yawned in a bored sort of way, looked around, and then settled his head into his back again. Then a gust of bitter wind took them in the back of the neck, a small sting of frozen sleet on the skin woke them up as from a dream, and they knew their toes to be cold and their legs tired, and their own home distant a weary way. Once beyond the village, where the cottages ceased abruptly, on either side of the road, they could smell through the darkness the friendly fields again, and they braced themselves for the last long stretch, the home stretch. They plodded along steadily and silently, each of them thinking his own thoughts. The moles ran a good deal on supper, as it was pitch dark, and it was all a strange country to him as far as he knew, and he was following obediently in the wake of the rat, leaving the guidance entirely to him. As for the rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as his habit was, his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him, so he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly the summons reached him and took him like an electric shock. It was one of those mysterious fairy calls from out the void that suddenly reached Mole in the darkness, making him tingle through and through with its very familiar appeal, even while as yet he could not clearly remember what it was. He stopped dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in efforts to recapture the fine filament, the telegraphic current that had so strongly moved him. A moment, and he had caught it again, and with it this time came recollection in fullest flood. Home! That's what they meant. Those caressing appeals, those soft touches wafted through the air, those invisible little hands pulling and tugging all one way. Why, it must be quite close by him at that moment, his old home that he had hurriedly forsaken and never sought again, that day when he first found the river. The call was clear, the summons was plain. He must obey it instantly, and go. "Ratty!" he called, full of joyful excitement. "Hold on, come back, I want you, quick!" "Oh, come along, Mole," replied the rat cheerfully, still plodding along. "Please stop, Ratty," pleaded the poor Mole in anguish of heart. "You don't understand. It's my home, my old home. I've just come across the smell of it, and it's close by here, really quite close, and I must go to it. I must. Oh, come back, Ratty, please, please come back." The rat was by this time too far ahead to hear clearly what the mole was calling. too far to catch the sharp note of painful appeal in his voice, and he was much taken up with the weather, for he too could smell something suspiciously like approaching snow. Mole, we mustn't stop now, really. We'll come for it tomorrow, whatever it is you found. But I daren't stop now. It's late and the snow's coming on again, and I'm not sure of the way. And I want your nose, Mole, so come on quick, there's a good fellow. And the rat pressed forward on his way without waiting for an answer. Poor Mole stood alone in the road, his heart torn asunder, and a big sob gathering somewhere low down inside him to leap up to the surface. But even under such a test as this, his loyalty to his friends stood firm. Never for a moment did he dream of abandoning him. With a wrench that tore his very heartstrings, he set his face down the road and followed submissively in the track of the rat, while faint, thin little smells, still dogging his retreating nose, reproached him for his new friendship and his callous forgetfulness. With an effort, he caught up to the unsuspecting rat, who began chattering cheerfully about what they would do when they got back, and how jolly a fire of logs in the parlor would be, and what a supper he meant to eat, never noticing his companion's silence and distressful state of mind. At last, however, when they had gone some considerable way further and were passing some tree stumps, he stopped and said kindly, "Look here, Mole, old chap, you seem dead tired. No talk left in you, and your feet dragging like lead. We'll sit down here for a minute and rest. The snow has held off so far, and the best part of our journey is over." The mole subsided forlornly on a tree stump and tried to control himself, but he felt it surely coming. The sob he had fought with so long refused to be beaten. The rat, astonished and dismayed at the violence of Mole's paroxysm of grief, did not dare to speak. At last he said very quietly, "What is it, old fellow? Whatever can be the matter? Tell us your trouble, and let me see what I can do." Poor Mole found it difficult to get any words out between the upheavals of his chest that followed one upon another so quickly, and held back speech and choked it as it came. "I know it's a shabby, dingy little place," he sobbed forth at last brokenly. "Not like your cozy quarters, or Toad's beautiful hall, or Badger's great house, but it was my own little home, and I was fond of it. And I went away and forgot all about it, and then I smelled it suddenly on the road when I called and you wouldn't listen, Rat, and everything came back to me with a rush. Oh dear, and when you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, and I had to leave it, though I was smelling it all the time, I thought my heart would break. We might have just gone and had one look at it, Ratty, only one look. It was close by, but you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, you wouldn't turn back." Recollection brought fresh waves of sorrow, and sobs again took full charge of him, preventing further speech. The rat stared straight in front of him, saying nothing. After a time he muttered gloomily, "I see it all now. What a pig I have been! A pig! That's me! Just a pig! A plain pig!" He waited till Mole's sobs became gradually less stormy. He waited till at last sniffs were frequent and sobs only intermittent. Then he rose from his seat and, remarking carelessly, "Well now, we'd really better be getting on, old chap," set up off the road again over the toilsome way they had come. "Wherever are you going to, Ratty?" cried the tearful Mole, looking up in alarm. "We're going to find that home of yours, old fellow," replied the rat pleasantly, "so you had better come along, for it will take some finding, and we shall want your nose." "Oh, come back, Ratty, do!" cried the mole, getting up and hurrying after him. "It's no good, I tell you. It's too late and too dark, and the place is too far off, and the snow is coming, and I never meant to let you know I was feeling that way about it. It was all an accident and a mistake, and think of Riverbank, and your supper." "Hang Riverbank, and supper too," said the rat heartily. "I tell you, I'm going to find this place now if I stay out all night. So cheer up, old chap, and take my arm, and we'll very soon be back there again." Still snuffling, Mole suffered himself to be dragged back along the road by his imperious companion, who, by a flow of cheerful talk and anecdote, endeavored to beguile his spirits back and make the weary way seem shorter. "Now no more talking. Business. Use your nose and give your mind to it." They moved on in silence for some little way, when suddenly Mole stood a moment rigid, while his uplifted nose, quivering slightly, felt the air. Then a short, quick run forward, and then a slow, steady, confident advance. The rat, much excited, kept close to his heels as the mole, with something of the air of a sleepwalker, crossed a dry ditch, scrambled through a hedge, and nosed his way over a field open and trackless and bare in the faint starlight. Suddenly, without giving warning, he dived. But the rat was on the alert, and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. It was close and airless, and the earthy smell was strong, and it seemed a long time to Rat. The mole struck a match, and by its light the rat saw that they were standing in an open space, neatly swept and sanded underfoot, and directly facing them was Mole's little front door with Mole End painted in Gothic lettering over the bell pull at the side. Mole reached down a lantern from the nail on the wall and lit it, and the rat, looking round him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all his objects so dear to him, and he hurried Rat through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance round his old home. He saw the dust lying thick on everything, saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long-neglected house, and its narrow, meagre dimensions, its worn and shabby contents, and collapsed again on a hall chair, his nose in his paw. "Oh, Ratty," he cried dismally, "why ever did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this, when you might have been at Riverbank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire, with all your nice things about you?" The rat paid no heed. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little thing here, and everything in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want is a good fire. I'll see to that. So this is the parlor? Splendid. Your own idea, those little sleeping bugs in the wall? Capital. Now I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole. You'll find one in the drawer of the kitchen table, and try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap." Encouraged by his inspiring companion, the mole roused himself and dusted and polished with energy and heartiness, while the rat, running to and fro with armfuls of fuel, soon had a cheerful blaze roaring up the chimney. He hailed the mole to come down and warm himself, but Mole promptly had another fit of the blues, dropping down on a couch in dark despair and burying his face in his duster. "Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper? You poor, cold, hungry, weary animal! I've nothing to give you, nothing, not a crumb." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the rat. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere in the neighborhood. Rouse yourself, pull yourself together, and come with me and forage." They went out and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not so very depressing after all, though of course it might have been better. A tin of sardines, a box of Captain's biscuits, and a German sausage encased in silver paper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the rat. "I know some animals who would give their ears to be sitting down to supper with us tonight." "No bread," groaned the mole, "no butter, no pâté de foie gras, no champagne," continued the rat, grinning. "And that reminds me, what's that little door at the end of the passage? Your cellar, of course. Every luxury in this house." He made for the cellar door, and presently reappeared, somewhat dusty, with a bottle of beer in each paw and another under each arm. "Self-indulgent beggar you seem to be, Mole. Deny yourself nothing. This is really the jolliest little place I was ever in." "No wonder you're so fond of it, Mole. Tell us all about it, and how you came to make it what it is." Then, while the rat busied himself fetching plates and knives and forks and mustard, the mole related how this was planned, and how that was thought out, and how this was got through a windfall from an aunt, and that was a wonderful find and a bargain, and this other thing was brought out of laborious savings, and a certain amount of going without. His spirits finally quite restored, he must needs go and caress his possessions, and take a lamp and show off their points to his visitor, and expatiate on them, quite forgetful of the supper they both so much needed. Rat, who was desperately hungry, but strove to conceal it, nodding seriously, examining, saying, "Wonderful, most remarkable," at intervals, when the chance for an observation was given him. At last the rat succeeded in decoying him to a table, when sounds were heard from the forecourt. Sounds like the scuffling of small feet in the gravel and a confused murmur of tiny voices, while broken sentences reached them. Now all in a line. Hold the lantern up a bit, Tommy. Clear your throats first. No coughing. Where's young Bill? Here, come on, we're all waiting. What's up? Inquired the rat, pausing in his labors. I think it must be the field mice, replied the mole. They go round carol singing regularly at this time of the year. They're quite an institution in these parts, and they never pass me over. They come to Mole End last of all, and I used to give them hot drinks and supper too sometimes when I could afford it. It will be like old times to hear them again. It was a pretty sight and a seasonable one that met their eyes when they flung the door open. Some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red worsted comforters round their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jiggling for warmth. With bright, beady eyes, they glanced shyly at each other, laughing a little, sniffing, and applying coat sleeves a good deal. As the door opened, one of the 3 elder ones that carried the lantern was just saying, "Now then, 1, 2, 3. And forthwith their little shrill voices uprose in the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in fields that were fallow and held by frost. Villagers all this frosty tide, let your doors swing open wide. Though wind may follow and snow beside, yet draws us in by your fire to bide. Joy shall be yours in the morning. Here we stand in the cold and the sleet, blowing fingers and stamping feet, come from far away to greet you by the fire and we in the street, bidding you joy in the morning. For ere 1/2 of the night was gone, sudden a star has led us on, raining bliss and benison, bliss tomorrow and more anon, joy for every morning. Good man Joseph toiled through the snow, saw the star o'er a stable low. Mary she might not further go, welcome thatch and litter below, joy was hers in the morning. And then they heard the angels tell, who were the first to cry Noel, animals first as it befell, in the stable where they dwell, joy shall be theirs in the morning. The voices ceased. The singers, bashful but smiling, exchanged sidelong glances, and silence succeeded, but for a moment only. Very well sung, boys, cried the rat heartily, and now come along in, all of you, and warm yourselves by the fire, and have something hot. Yes, come along, field mice. This is quite like old times. Shut the door after you. Pull up that settle to the fire. Now you just wait a minute while we... Oh, Ratty, whatever are we doing? We have nothing to give them. You leave all that to me, said the masterful rat. Here, you with the lantern, come over this way. I want to talk to you. Now tell me, are there any shops open at this hour of the night? Why, certainly, sir, replied the field mouse respectfully. At this time of the year, our shops keep open to all sorts of hours. Then look here. You go off at once, you and your lantern, and you get me. Here much muttered conversation ensued, and the mole only heard bits of it. Finally, there was a chink of coins passing from paw to paw. The field mouse was provided with an ample basket for his purchases, and off he hurried, he and his lantern. The rest of the field mice, perched in a row on the settle, their small legs swinging, gave themselves up to enjoyment of the fire, and toasted their chilblains till they tingled. The rat, meanwhile, was busy examining the label on one of the beer bottles. I perceive this to be old Burton, he remarked approvingly. Sensible mole, the very thing. Now we shall be able to mull some ale. Get the things ready, Mole, while I draw the corks. It did not take long to prepare the brew and thrust the tin heater well into the red heart of the fire, and soon every field mouse was sipping and coughing and choking and wiping his eyes and laughing and forgetting that he had ever been cold in all his life. They act plays too, these fellows, the mole explained to the rat. Make them up all by themselves and act them afterwards, and very well they do it too. They gave us a capital one last year. You were in it, I remember. Get up and recite a bit. The field mouse addressed got up on his legs, giggled shyly, looked round the room, and remained absolutely tongue-tied. His comrades cheered him on, Mole coaxed and encouraged him, and the Rat went so far as to take him by the shoulders and shake him, but nothing would overcome his stage fright. They were all busily engaged on him like watermen applying the Royal Humane Society's regulation to a case of long submersion, when the latch clicked, the door opened, and the field mouse with the lantern reappeared, staggering under the weight of his basket. There was no more talk of play acting once the very real and solid contents of the basket tumbled out onto the table. The field mice gave him the local gossip up to date, and answered as well they could the 100 questions he had to ask them. The Rat said little or nothing, only taking care that each guest had what he wanted and plenty of it, and that Mole had no trouble or anxiety about anything. They clattered off at last, very grateful, and showering wishes of the season with their jacket pockets stuffed with remembrances for the small brothers and sisters at home. When the door had closed on the last of them, and the chink of the lanterns had died away, Mole and Rat kicked the fire up, drew their chairs in, brewed themselves a last nightcap of mulled ale, and discussed the events of the long day. At last the Rat, with a tremendous yawn, said, "Mole, old chap, I'm ready to drop. Sleepy is simply not the word. That your own bunk over there on that side? Very well, then, I'll take this. What a ripping little house this is. Everything's so handy." He clambered into his bunk and rolled himself well in the blankets, and slumber gathered him forthwith, as a swath of barley is folded into the arms of the reaping machine. The weary Mole was also glad to turn in without delay, and soon had his head on the pillow, in great joy and contentment. But ere he closed his eyes, he let them wander round his old room, mellow in the glow of the firelight that played or rested on familiar and friendly things which had long been unconsciously a part of him, and now smilingly received him back, without rancor. He was now in just the frame of mind that the tactful Rat had quietly worked to bring about in him. He saw clearly how plain and simple, how narrow even it all was, but clearly, too, how much it meant to him, and the special value of such anchorage in one's existence. He did not at all want to abandon the new life and its splendid spaces, to turn his back on the sun and air and all they offered him, and creep home and stay there. But it was good to think that he had this to come back to, this place which was all his own, these things which were so glad to see him again, and could always be counted on for the same simple welcome. The end. So that was it for Chapter 5. Don't forget to join me next time on From the Shelf for Chapter 6. Goodbye.